Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by the Happy President. Part 4, Knowing Our Minds. Chapter 17, Beliefs and Attitudes. Our beliefs, attitudes, and values are closely connected. This chapter examines each of these three components of our character. Belief and experience. I believe that the sun will come up again tomorrow. I believe that if I take a certain road, I'll get to town. These beliefs are expectations that grow out of my direct experience in knowing my world. Some things I believe because other people tell me they're so. An astronomer tells me that a planet we call Pluto revolves around the sun. I've never seen it, but I believe that it exists because I trust the methods of astronomers. We can call these rational beliefs. Rational belief is belief supported by available evidence. We can also distinguish blind belief, which is belief in the absence of evidence, and irrational belief, which is belief contrary to available evidence. Dogmatism includes both blind belief and irrational belief. Dogmatically held beliefs are data based on limited personal experience or hearsay. I may end up distorting my experience to fit my beliefs. In The Open and Closed Mind, social psychologist Milton Rokeach has shown that we usually know much more about what we believe than about what we don't believe, and that this tendency is stronger the more tightly we hold on to our beliefs. By staying ignorant about anything I don't agree with, I can avoid changing. On the other hand, by finding out more about those things I don't believe in, I can open up to growth and learning. Open scrutiny of what is leads to innovation and renewal. My colleague David Perry, who was both a Miwok Indian and an anthropologist, was trained as a shaman, a healer. The shaman's path of learning, he once told me, includes strict training to believe nothing, to accept only what we have experienced for ourselves. I was taught that the most important thing of all is to know what I do not know. Mary, who was listening, asked, "Then do you hold nothing sacred?" On the contrary, I hold everything sacred. I hold my knowing of the world so sacred that I take every chance to make it more accurate. Refusal to question some contradiction in my understanding of reality means that I do not respect my view of things enough. A view that I have questioned mercifully merits far more reverence than one I have never challenged. Images, beliefs about ourselves and our world. My imagination is helpful when I want to keep some distance from what's happening in me and around me. I can use my ability to fantasize to avoid being overwhelmed by my pain or my fear. If I'm here and now in my fantasy, rather than distracted by it, it can be a rich place for me. The important thing is that I know I'm in my imagination and that I can move in and out of it, as befits the occasion. Yet images can also work against us. I used to buy records thinking that there were certain kinds of records I should have. I had an image of a proper record collection. Finally, I realized how limiting that was and began to buy only music that I really like to listen to. Relating to an image of another person, rather than to the other as he or she is, distorts relationships. In this process of idealization, each person finds ways to avoid seeing how the other doesn't fit the image in his or her mind. When the image finally fades and the two stand naked to each other's gaze, they find, sometimes too late, that who they wanted isn't what they got. The self-image. My self-image is a picture of myself that I carry in my mind. If I grow up among people who accept me as I am, the self-image I develop is apt to be flexible. As I change, I reweave my image of myself. When you try to deal with me as I once was, I can say, I'm not the same as when you knew me before. Here's how I am now. The shakier my definition of who I am, the more easily I'm threatened by anything that challenges that definition. So when I turn my finest angle to the camera, what I can't admire, I don't see. My image of myself affects what I make available for you to perceive. For example, if I see myself as important, I'm asking you to respond to me as important. In my daydreams and my daily life, I can lose time and energy trying to make myself look good. I plaster my life with pictures of a temple so no one will know I'm really a used car lot. One day, my friend Sally and I were talking and made some guesses about what she meant. She replied, "No, not any of those things. I just wanted to hear myself talk." How refreshing. She didn't have to keep up the image of always being sensible and intelligent. Another dimension of self-image is that most of us have ideas about what we can and can't do. I can't do some things only because I've never put time and effort into learning them. But my self-image tells me I can't do those things, so I live within the narrow limits of the self-fulfilling prophecy I've created for myself. Psychologist Prescott Leckie studied a group of students who spelled badly. These people had no lack of ability. They spelled foreign words as well as anyone, but in their own minds, they were poor spellers. When they tried to spell in English, their every act conspired to uphold that self-concept. Leckie found that the poor speller expects his defect to be condoned and treated sympathetically, so he was clever enough to find an image that was more important to the students than that of being poor spellers. That was an image of themselves as self-reliant and independent. When Leckie showed his students how those two pictures of themselves clashed head to head, many of the poor spellers started spelling better. Idealized images. My image of how I want to be can be a starting point for learning. At first glance, the process seems straightforward. I often behave in some way I'd rather not. I see another way of acting I like more, so I try to act that way. This is a useful and sometimes even necessary process. The danger, however, is that if I become obsessed with my image of who I want to be, I can lose sight of who I am. I may set my perfectionist ideals so high that I have little chance of reaching them. I protect myself against being criticized for not having high ideals or against ever having to make a realistic effort to meet my ideals, since I've set them so high that they're impossible to attain, and therefore I needn't really try. And I also condemn myself to unending self-torture for never meeting them. Idealizing another person can lead to just as much anxiety about being inadequate as idealizing myself can cause, as I defend myself against recognizing how I really am. On the other hand, I can imitate a special quality I find in another person and move in the direction of behaving in a way I admire without having to act just like that person. That leaves me free to find my own expression of my new way. Feelings of inferiority and striving for superiority. Alfred Adler, one of the pioneers of modern psychology, wrote at length about feelings of inferiority and superiority. In many of his patients, he observed a process he called striving for superiority that originates in a feeling of inferiority. As a child, I am inferior in many ways compared to the adults around me. Yet if those adults help me to do so, I can feel delight with myself as I am now. I don't have to compare myself to anyone. But if adults and other children think that they have to make me feel small so they can feel big, they will tell and show me in many ways that they're superior. As I grow in size and strength, I begin to imitate their ways. I step on others and make them feel small so that I can feel superior by comparison. Even after those who made me feel inferior are in the grave, I may still be trying to compensate for the feelings of inferiority they induced in me by making others feel small so I can feel big. Thus, I keep the vicious circle going. Feelings of caring and satisfaction are outside the hardcore dualistic game of superior and inferior. When I start appreciating myself as I am, I don't have to feel superior. Finding your talents for success. Explore your strengths. What do you like to do? What do you actually spend your time doing? Success and failure. For most of us, success and failure are important parts of our self-images. When I've failed consistently, I may conclude that I can't succeed at anything. If so, a central fact is that I'm very successful at failing. If I'm successful at failing, I know one thing for sure. I get some kind of satisfaction, some secondary gain out of failure. I actually fail is the central event, but there are secondary gains such as your sympathy. "Oh, what a shame. Well, you tried and you're a good fella. Keep trying." If, when I fail, I get support and warmth from you that I don't get at other times, I may learn to fail in order to get those goodies. When I consistently fail, I get something else too: predictability. I know what to do to fail, what circumstances to do it in, and how I'll respond to my failure. I face little uncertainty. If I'm a school dropout who is saying, "I know how to fail, I can do that well," I'm apt to be afraid that if I change, I'll be faced with doing something I won't do as well. So I carefully guard my image of myself as a failure. As I listen to you tell me how you're failing, I may notice that you speak well and easily. You tell me you like to shoot the breeze with people. Okay, let's see how you can get paid for that. A good talker might do well in public relations, or promotional work, or sales, or as a radio announcer or social worker, or a teacher. If you work in a factory, check out the union. You might become shop steward. Even if you see nowhere to go right now, you've done something by getting your energy together to explore. Sometimes it takes time to find your way. What counts is that you're moving in the direction you want to move in. Begin watching for things you sometimes succeed and sometimes fail at. For instance, perhaps you don't often do or say little things to help other people feel good. Give yourself extra appreciation when you do succeed at these things. Pay special attention when you get into failure talk inside your head. Notice the body position you go into when you feel like a failure. Exaggerate it. Do it to the point where you feel ridiculous to get fully in touch with what you do. Then talk your failure talk out loud to yourself, exaggerating that too. Take as long as you need to hear clearly what you're doing to yourself. Now you can do something else. From here on out, whenever you notice that you're in your failure posture, move into a posture that lets you feel good in your body. When you notice failure talk inside your head, you can cancel the rest of it and direct your attention into ways of thinking that involve encouraging or rewarding yourself. Belittling and put-downs from others make it easier to feel like a failure. Statements of confidence and support from others, by contrast, can help me feel competent. The more willing I am to use the statements of support I get and avoid people who belittle me, the more easily I can move forward feeling capable of standing on my own 2 feet. Many people spend so much time generalizing their problems that they don't get down to working on specific things. My problem is self-confidence. I can't do anything different now because self-confidence takes time to get. If you pick out something you can do and do it, already you're successful. Tomorrow, if you wish, you can do a little more. Success and failure on our own terms. Suppose I have a job that fits everyone's image of success. Look at what a great job he has, they say, but I don't like what I'm doing. There's something else I'd rather do. I may face pressure from people who think I'm crazy to give up that great job to do something that pays less or has less prestige. But if I'm in touch with what I want from life, I can withstand that pressure. I can start to define success in my own way instead of someone else's. I can make decisions that will help me lead the life I want to lead instead of those that will make me look successful, unless looking successful is something that I value very highly. I don't have to poison myself by trying to live a life that is not my own in order to fit somebody else's image or my own obsolete image of me. I can find a way to be successful in my own terms. Attitudes. Every attitude has both an affective or feeling component and a cognitive component, beliefs about the person, thing, or event involved in the attitude. This includes beliefs about how that person, thing, or event will help or hinder the achievement of our personal goals. Each attitude also has a behavioral component, how we behave and feel we ought to behave toward the object of our attitude. We develop attitudes both through our conscious choices and through a lifetime of conditioning. Horowitz demonstrated that behavior change can lead to attitude change and points out that we infer our attitudes from our behavior. Based on what we perceive ourselves doing, we attribute certain attitudes to ourselves. Our attitudes are influenced by what we do, and they, in turn, contribute to our behavior. Cognitive consistency and balance. Social psychologist Fritz Heider studied how attitudes do and don't fit together and why they change. People feel impelled, he argued, to keep consistent relationships among their beliefs, opinions, and attitudes. If these don't fit, they feel distressed and want to change their attitudes or actions. To be perceived as inconsistent, cognitions must come into conscious confrontation with each other. For example, many residents of the eastern Nevada and southern Utah fallout belt supported nuclear testing until their neighbors and relatives started coming down with cancer. A positive attitude toward nuclear testing began to seem inconsistent with a positive attitude toward good health and long life. Heider held that we try to keep our attitudes in a balanced state, one in which our various attitudes fit together harmoniously. When new facts upset the balance, we look for a way to change an attitude that will restore it. So if I like and respect you, I may feel uncomfortable when we feel differently about important events or ideas. I expect you to feel as I do about important matters, yet we disagree on this one. That discomfort may provoke us to search for some way to agree. People tend, writes Hollander, to share the attitudes of those they like and to like those who share their attitudes. The same options are available when the attitudes in question are toward another person. If I like you and our attitudes about Rebecca differ, I may begin to change my attitude toward her so that it's more consistent with yours. Or I may change my attitude toward you. Or I may try to persuade you to agree with me so our attitudes will be similar. These dynamics are often involved in pressures toward conformity. If I like you, I may see your views as more like mine than they actually are. If I dislike you, I may see them as more different than they are. I may distract myself from being aware of something that's inconsistent with a strong attitude. Kurt Lewin called this leaving the field. I may physically get up and go, or psychologically depart by daydreaming or picking up a magazine. If I want consistency more than I want clarity, my clarity may suffer. I may also minimize the relevance or importance of the issue or differentiate what's involved in our disparate views. Suppose you and I feel differently about a certain senator. As we talk, we find that you favor his proposals for the economy while I dislike his views on defense. As you explain his economic program, it sounds all right to me, but you discover that you don't like his views on defense any more than I do. Our attitudes are really about different things. In this case, focusing on specifics allows us to achieve consistency and also learn something. Cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger in 1957 broadened the meaning of cognitive consistency when he suggested that people seek consonance not just between attitudes, but also between attitudes and actions that are related to them. He used the term cognitive dissonance rather than imbalance for the tension we feel when our attitudes and actions seem inconsistent. He found that most people want to think they've done the best thing and will go to great lengths to avoid thinking they've done something wrong or stupid. Thus, if I act in a way that harms another person, I may make myself dislike that person in order to justify my action in my own eyes. For instance, an employer may exploit his workers, then rationalize his action by viewing them as ignorant, shiftless, and good for nothing. Festinger suggests 3 ways to reduce dissonance: changing our behavior, changing the way we look at events that cause dissonance, and seeking out new cognitions that help reduce the dissonance. A smoker who's worried about her health, for instance, may stop smoking, deny that it's really dangerous, or think, it's relaxing and I smoke a low-tar brand. Research on dissonance has stressed 2 kinds of situations. The first is a situation requiring decision-making. Whenever we freely decide between 2 or more alternatives and commit ourselves to one of them, dissonance occurs, because there is always something desirable about the option foregone and something negative about the choice we made. The urge to reduce that dissonance can lead to a reappraisal in which we feel even more positive toward our chosen alternative and more negative toward the other one than before we decided. For example, Knox and Inkster found that after placing their bets, bettors at a racetrack are more confident that their horse will win than just before they placed them. And Brehm and Cohen found that after children chose one of 2 toys they had rated as equally attractive, their liking for the toy they selected went up and their liking for the other one went down. One way we can reduce post-decision dissonance is through selective exposure to information. The man who just put his last $5 on Dragging Tail rereads the parts of the racing form that inspired him to make that bet and pays less attention to the rest. Cognitive dissonance studies have described situations where we do something inconsistent with our beliefs or self-image with minimal justification. In many cases, people given just barely enough incentive to get them to do something, in one study the something was eating grasshoppers, develop more positive attitudes toward what they did than those who were given much larger incentives. Eating grasshoppers must be okay, the underlying reasoning seems to run, because I chose to eat them. By contrast, if the payoff for eating them was big, I figure I just did it for the money. In a second kind of situation that doesn't meet the requirements of importance and perceived free choice, a different prediction often holds. Our attitudes become more positive towards the things we're significantly reinforced for doing. Prejudice. Prejudice is a judgmental attitude coupled with blind or irrational beliefs that I hold strongly and resist changing. One kind of prejudice we all share is prejudice about ourselves. I can't do this. I don't know how to do that. Prejudice is a way of thinking, feeling, and acting. The more prejudiced I am toward people and events out there in my world, the more prejudiced I'm likely to be about myself. My prejudice may take the form of feeling hostile toward an entire group of people. When I do that, I respond to any member of that group as a group member rather than a unique individual. I may prejudge a member of the group without ever having met that person. When I'm prejudiced in favor of a person or group, I may refuse to perceive, believe, or do anything unfavorable about that person or group, and act in ways that give them special considerations. People's attitudes about the Reverend Jim Jones led them to their deaths in Jonestown. Prejudice can be both a result and a cause of lack of information about others. Knowing very little about some group I distrust, I may also prejudice myself against wanting to learn anything about them and keep myself ignorant through the mechanism of selective attention. The less prejudiced I am, the more likely I am to be willing to look into myself and discover the prejudices I do have. Some prejudices are tied in with scapegoating. Scapegoating is dumping the blame for my troubles on someone who has had little or no part in creating them. As I come to know my prejudices, I can stop short of translating them into discrimination. Each one of us uses the principle of reframing. When I say something that you take the wrong way, I reply, "You misunderstood. I meant something quite different," and then go on to establish a framework of meaning different from the one you'd inferred. What reframing is. To reframe something, declare communication theorist Paul Watzlawick. What reframing is. To reframe something, declare communication theorists of the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, is to place it in another frame which fits the facts of the same concrete situation equally well or even better, and thereby changes its entire meaning. The situation itself may remain quite unchanged and, indeed, even unchangeable. What changes is the meaning attributed to the situation and therefore its consequences. Reframing involves getting people to observe. How else can I think about this situation and what I'm doing in it? Instead of telling ourselves the same story day in and day out, we think of a new one that not only casts things in a different light, but may even be more plausible than our old one. Variations of this process have evolved under several names. Albert Ellis has developed his well-known rational emotive therapy. Behavioral psychologist Arnold Lazarus coined the term cognitive restructuring, which is used here as a general term in all cognitive behavioral methods. All these approaches aspire to teach us how to expand the way we feel and act by extending what we think. For instance, "I made a mistake on that job. How terrible!" A mistake, which may not be so awful, we all make plenty of mistakes, is thus transformed into a disaster because I classify it as such. Then I may feel and act as I would in a disastrous situation. Disaster becomes my reality. When many of us believe the same thing and talk about it to each other, what we believe is reified, regarded as a real thing in its own right. Systems at work. One thing that people rarely understand, state Bandler and Grinder, is that people's symptoms work. Often we neither appreciate the positive purpose underlying a troubling pattern, nor recognize how the pattern accomplishes that purpose because the entire process is largely unconscious. Reframing is most effective when it's based on theory of positive intent. Reframing that includes this additional element will henceforth be called positive reframing. Bandler and Grinder, for instance, mention an overweight woman who had several times lost 40 pounds and gained it back. It turned out that her underlying positive intent in staying overweight was to protect her marriage. She was afraid that if she were slender and attractive, she'd be propositioned and might accept. Salvador Minuchin practices reframing with families. He calls it enlarging the focal theme. Family members will mention some terrible problem and he'll say, "It's great that you're talking about that." And it is. It means they want to make some kind of positive change, and they've had the strength to bring it out and deal with it instead of hiding it. Troublesome old themes are transformed into new forms that open up possibilities. From this perspective, it makes sense to regard any self-destructive or self-limiting pattern as a message from some part of me. Recurrent headaches, for instance, may be a signal that I need to work less and play more. Restructuring faulty thinking patterns. Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck have both emphasized the process of replacing irrational ideas about ourselves and our lives with rational ones. Among the irrational beliefs that Ellis identifies as extremely common are these: that you must have sincere love and approval almost all the time from all the people you find significant. That because something once strongly influenced your life, it has to keep determining your feelings and your behavior today. That people and things should turn out better than they do, and that you have to view it as awful and horrible if you do not quickly find good solutions to life's hassles. That you must have a high degree of order or certainty to feel comfortable. Most of these irrational beliefs involve the idea that we must behave in certain ways, or that events should happen in some prescribed fashion. All lead to negative judgments about ourselves and our existence. Ellis calls this process masturbation. He suggests that we also be alert for awfulizing, telling ourselves that certain things are awful or terrible. A variation is catastrophizing. It would be a disaster. We can likewise listen for self-talk about things we can't bear, as in, I can't stand it when my boss ignores my suggestions. Beck points out that our self-defeating beliefs and attitudes are not completely irrational, but overstatements, too extreme, too broad, or too arbitrary. Once a self-defeating idea is identified, both Beck and Ellis proceed to test the limits of its rationality. Beck points out several ways we're especially likely to distort our ideas about ourselves. We've already met dualistic thinking, like interpreting a mild rebuff as total rejection, jumping to conclusions without evidence to back them up, and overgeneralization, such as concluding from one mistake that I'll never be able to do anything right. Beck also mentions errors of omission, like emphasizing a detail while ignoring its larger context, and personalizing, incorrectly referring an outside event to oneself. When we're stuck in self-defeating attitudes, another person can be helpful. Reframing may involve actions as well as attitudes. Ellis, for example, frequently gives his clients homework that involves in vivo desensitization. A shy client may simultaneously learn to be more assertive as she learns that it isn't a disaster when her assertion doesn't get her all she wants. Valuing. Values are central, enduring appraisals of what's important to us in ourselves, our lives, and our larger world. Some values we choose consciously, others we introject, incorporate uncritically and unconsciously. Infants have a natural sense of what helps them live, grow, and feel good, and what does not. They positively value food and negatively value hunger. But when full, they negatively value food. The infant, writes Rogers, values the holding and caressing, values new experience, and is endlessly curious and forever exploring. Unlike many of us, he knows what he likes and dislikes. He is not at this point influenced by what his parents think he should prefer, or by the opinion of the latest expert in the field, or by the persuasive talents of an advertising firm. As the infant grows, Those around him command him to accept their fixed values in place of his own organic valuing process. A parent can negate or disconfirm the child's experience of the world and then define the world for the child. The values clarification approach, made popular by Sidney Simon and his colleagues, includes comparing our own valuings with those of others. One way to make such a comparison, suggests Simon, Howe, and Kirschenbaum, is to imagine that you're emigrating to another country and can take only one suitcase. Make a list of what's so important to you that you want it in that suitcase. Besides physical items, you can include a few ways of thinking and behaving that you want to retain in the face of whatever you might meet. Then, discuss your lists with others who have made their own. There are graduations in our level of commitment to anything we value, from thinking about it quietly to ourselves, to making public statements, to actively doing something about it, to doing something about it and trying to arouse others to do so. I actively value something to the degree that I'm willing to put my energy into doing something about it. My valuing process shows itself in my interests, preferences, decisions, and actions. I see most clearly what I value when I look at how I spend my time, money, and energy. Marty says he values peace and social justice, but so long as I've known him, I've never seen him put any energy or resources into those directions. He spends most of his spare time sitting home reading mystery novels and appears to me to value that activity more highly than peace and social justice. On the other hand, Marty does at least say that he values peace and justice. We can call these cognitive values. When he begins to do something about them, they become active values. End of chapter 17.